Hello and welcome back to what will most likely be the last episode of our little auto crafting room here. Today I want to get some reaction chambers going, some assemblers going, all on like requestable recipes. And then once that's done, we can then design this room. So without further ado, let's get into it. On the left side of the screen, we have got a few things, basically everything that we're going to need to learn to automate inside of the reaction chambers. Now, every item that I've just shown you right there, I don't need mass amounts of. I don't need millions of them, so we're going to put them on pattern providers, so I can request them at my leisure. However, when I placed the reaction chamber down with the pattern, I then realized, hang on a minute, I'm going to struggle to power this because obviously the end gate takes up a full block space. But fortunately for me, Modular Routers has an energy distribution module, and it was fairly easy to set up. We just grabbed a energy cell from power, put the end gate on top of that, providing the energy cell with power, and then simply just tell the module to pull from the energy cell and distribute it to the reaction chamber, making sure we had the energy upgrades in there, though otherwise this would not work. It was that simple. So the next step was to supply this thing with a fluid. Now in this case, I'm going to use water. And again, we'll grab a modular router and tell it to pull water with a fluid module from a sink, because that's infinite water, and send it to the reaction chamber. And that is basically it. It's very simple. So all we need to do now is grab a pattern, and in this case I'm going to use the Entro infused ingot, and we're going to create a pattern for that. However, we don't actually need the water because we actually already have the water in there constantly being fed inside. So we just take that out of the process, place in the pattern, and give it a little test. And of course, it works, and it works like a dream. However, we're not getting those items sent out of that reaction chamber back into our system. So again, what I'm going to do to keep this as minimalistic as possible and we can stack the reaction chambers, I'm going to get a modular router to tell it to pull out the filtered item of Entro infused ingot and send it to the chest that we have set up going already back to our system. And basically, that's how we're going to set up every single one of these reaction chambers. So now you can see I've set it up on another 2 different separate reaction chambers. Again, the process was the exact same. Now I've only set this up to 1, speed up mass quantities that we request, and in case we request something and it needs 2 recipes to be done with water, it can go to one of the other reaction chambers. So we're not waiting on one, basically. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing with lava. Again, setting it up with pattern providers. And sending all the items to the ME system in the exact same way through a modular router. And with those being complete, we now have 6 reaction chambers, 3 for lava, 3 for water. That's actually most of the recipes done, but those were the easy ones. So let's get on to the harder ones. So the only 2 recipes we have left are the quantum alloy and the quantum alloy plate. Now the quantum alloy, these things here, we're getting, and we can request the shattered singularity. So that's not an issue. These 3 items here, not an issue. It's the quantum infusion liquid that we need. And the way we get that is by quantum infused dust with water. Pretty simple stuff. We can get the water. This just requires a lot of shattered singularities, which is a singularity, ender dust, and skystone with lava. Now, luckily enough, I've already automated at least that process right here, and we're getting that constantly. However, I've had to use a little bit of a different system to get this to work, especially with the different set of quantities that we're having to use here. So I've used laser IO, and this one is a little bit more confusing than modular routers, if I'm being honest with you, but it's working. So with this, if we go on the down, because there's an end chest here, which is getting fed the items that it's required for the Shattered Singularity, we have to put a card in there. Now this card is on extract, so it extracts from this chest. And where it goes from this is, you see the red line? It goes to this laser node, and then back to this laser node, which is then got another card to insert on the reaction chamber side, which is an insert card. However, this insert card, if we open it up, has a counting filter with the recipe in, so it'll never allow any more than that amount of items inside of that reaction chamber. So we never, just make sure that goes in the right spec, never does. There you go, you've got to make sure you put it there, otherwise it won't work. So now, this reaction chamber will never fill up with ender dust or skystone dust, meaning we have a fully working, fully functional Shattered Singularity farm constantly. So the only thing that's left to do with this is to grab a modular router, pull out the Shattered Singularities, and send them into the inscriber. And now that we're getting the quantum infused dust, we have to pull that out and into this reaction chamber with water. And once that was set up, we were getting quantum infusion. So we need to send this now into a jumbo tank, just so it acts as a buffer. And then we will add another 3 reaction chambers with pattern providers, making sure they're all powered up, feed in the quantum infusion liquid, and then put in the correct patterns for each of the pattern providers. And we'll make 3 of each, so we can put 1 in each pattern provider. And once we were happy with that, it was then to test to make sure it was working, which it was. However, it wasn't feeding back into our main ME system, because I'd nearly forgot to set up the modular router to pull out those items and send it into the chest. So now let's go on to the processors, the 2 that we aren't getting. So the 2 processors that we are going to need are the quantum processor and the energy processor. However, if we were to add these 2 processors on here, it would take it to the ceiling. The problem with that then becomes this doesn't go to the ceiling. The requesters don't go to the ceiling. So I think to keep this symmetrical on all 4 sides, I'm going to make a little room just off at the back here. And we won't be able to see these 2 processors being made, which is a little unfortunate. So now that we've got a little bit of a room cleared out, we can throw in 3 inscribers with pattern providers in each. 1 for the energy printed press, 1 for the quantum printed press, and then 1 to make the actual 2 processors themselves. However, one of these inscribers is going to need a constant source of silicon presses and redstone. Now, silicon press, we can get a modular router to pull out from the drawer and send it into the inscriber. However, with the redstone, I tried to do this, but because there's a little bit of like fluctuations with the redstone going from like, maybe we've got like 30 to 40 in storage and then we've got to none, and it's prioritizing the other inscribers, we're going to have to set up just like a little farm. Only something dead small. I mean like 1 redstone plant, just continuously growing, feeding at least this inscriber redstone, which I'm fine with that. Plus it's going to be behind the wall anyway, so you're not actually going to see any of this anyway. So once we had set up a crafter with the redstone seed, it was time to set up another 2 modular routers, and these modular routers are gonna set to pull out from the inscriber the 2 printed circuit boards that we're making, the quantum and energy, and then we're gonna just simply send those straight into the ender chest that's nearby, sending it straight to our system. So with that being said, we can now hook up all these pattern providers to the system and make sure they have the correct patterns in. However, when it comes to the patterns, because we don't need the inscriber presses putting in because they're already in the inscribers themselves, we could just take that out of the recipe and just tell it to put in the charged redstone or the quantum ingot straight into the inscribers. We could then test this, and once it gave us one of each, we could then throw it into the middle inscriber to set up the next filters for the next modular router, which is only going to pull out the 2 processors once they're finished, and then again send them straight into the ender chest. Again, we want to make sure the patterns are correct, so they've only got the circuit boards, because obviously we're feeding it the silicone presses and the redstone automatically. It's going to be constantly full, so it's just the 2 different types of circuit boards that need to go in there, and once they're finished, the modular router will just send them back to the system, which means we have now automated the 2 processors that we were not getting before. So the only thing that's left to do in this room now is to add a recipe to make the crystal assemblers. Now, because we have 15 of the inscribers, 15 reaction chambers stuff going on over there, and even the requesters have 15 slots, we're going to need 15 crystal inscribers. Now, we can automate this process just by adding a pattern into the assembler matrix, and we could get those a crafting, because we actually automated the Entro ingot a little bit earlier on. Now, once we have 15 of these, I'm just going to use one little pattern provider for now and automate getting the extended pattern providers. And once we have that pattern, we can throw it into the pattern provider by the crystal assembler, and then we can make one more pattern for the advanced extended pattern provider. And we want 15 of these as well. And then we could hook those up to the system. And the recipes that we're going to need at this moment in time is, of course, the ME extended pattern provider, just in case we ever need to make some more advanced extended pattern providers. And most importantly, the ME extended drives, in case we ever need extras for our big brain system. And once all that was hooked up, this room pretty much completed in terms of processes that we're going to be adding to this. However, I do want every single behind the machinery accessible, just in case we ever need to make any changes to anything and stuff like that. So with that being said, it's time to design the room. And this is the final product. Now, I don't think it looks awful. I think the back here needs some work. But that can be done off camera. However, I like it. It looks okay. All the rooms can be accessible just by breaking the 2 planks. And then we can just mine around the back. Need to be. Go to the other side. Same here. But that's going to do us for today's video, so thank you all for watching. If you have enjoyed it, make sure to smash the like button, consider subscribing if you are new, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.